Hey there, darlings. What's up? Welcome back to Roots and Refuge Farm. So I'm out in, I don't know, I mean, it's still my garden. There's a lot of permanent structures here, but I would say I'm actively growing a garden in this space right now. This is the vestiges of the garden. And there is still a little bit of food out here. I'm still harvesting herbs for sure. Still coming out and getting the occasional handful of beans and a few cherry tomatoes. I'm still enjoying things going just bonkers, like these sweet potato vines. You can see my cherry tomatoes are pretty well over, but they actually taste amazing. This coming week, we're really starting to cool off a lot. We have some lows that are in the very low 40s, like 4 Celsius. The forecast keeps changing a little bit, but a couple nights have shown dipping down even into the 30s. And we could still go another 3 or 4 weeks without freezing. It could even go longer than that, just depending on what the weather does. But right now, for the raised bed garden, I'm going through and harvesting anything that I want to save seeds from. I'm going to harvest a bunch of the basil and dry it and kind of do my last run through the garden, today and tomorrow, and start pulling plants out so I can bring compost in, mulch everything, and essentially put this garden to bed. I don't always do that this early. Sometimes I just leave it and do it at some point over the winter. However, Maya has a punch list of things that he wants to work on in the garden, and so I'm gonna try to just get everything reset so I can sort of get out of this space for whenever it gets up to the point in his list where he is gonna get to it. I won't be in the way, and my stuff won't be in the way, and I'll make sure I get all the seeds I want out of here. So one of the things that you'll notice all over my garden, look at this, just climbed over onto this lemon tree. I've got these butter beans absolutely everywhere. So legumes, see right there, these are a local heirloom butter bean, and they're probably in about 8 different places on the garden. So this won't help you now because I know a lot of you have already frozen for the season, but I don't know, those of you on the other side of the equator, maybe you could keep this in mind, or y'all can keep it in mind for next year. But legumes are nitrogen fixers, and the way that works is when you plant any plant in the bean family, it's really windy out here, they essentially collect nitrogen and they store it in their roots. So a lot of times you'll see companion planting charts or whatever, and they'll tell you plant beans with squash because squash uses a lot of nitrogen and beans fix nitrogen. And it doesn't exactly work like that because the bean plants don't fix nitrogen in the soil while they're growing so much. It's that when they're done growing, you can cut those plants off, and as long as you leave the roots in the soil, all of that nitrogen that was stored in those roots, a lot of times if you pull bean plants up, you'll see little bumps all over the roots. It breaks down and it releases the nitrogen back into the soil. So if you're ever done with a garden space and you're not trying to plant necessarily anything else to harvest that season, throw some bean seeds in. They don't have to be expensive, they don't have to be fancy, you don't even have to want to eat them. I mean, I could just cut all these plants off and tear them out. I'm going to pick all these pods because it's food and seeds, so I'm not going to waste them. But you cut the plants off and leave the roots in the soil, and it's adding nitrogen back into your soil. So that's why there are beans just all over the place here. It was just those were areas that we'd already harvested what grew there. We just threw beans in, and they're all over the garden now. So I'm gonna start picking. I've got a little tub here, and I'm just gonna pull the pods off. They do kind of explode because they're really dry. They honestly sound really awesome. Sometimes when I'm pulling them off, they're just exploding and the beans are going everywhere, but for the most part, it's okay. Now with beans like this, I could have picked these when the pods were still green. Actually, here's a green pod, I'll show you. Let's get out of the bright. I cannot see the screen to even know what you're seeing. So this goes for, any sort of shelling bean or pea. You can pick them when the pod is green. They are a little harder to shell here. And you have this is the individual bean. Now at this point, they're really soft. That's not delicious. It's not awful. You know what? These would be really good pickled. Maybe next year. Y'all, I just talked to this camera for 5 minutes and it wasn't even recording. I'm on the struggle bus today. Let's start back over. So I'm gonna just repeat a bunch of stuff and hopefully I get everything. So if you take these fresh and you shell them fresh like this, you could cook the pods and then eat the beans out like edamame type. And that's you know, pretty okay. You would steam them and then just pop the individual beans out and eat them with some salt or something like that. But if you shell a bunch of them, you could saute aromatics in some butter and then put the fresh beans in, a little bit of broth, and simmer them, and they'd be ready to eat in like less than 30 minutes, depending on how soft you like them. If you let them dry on the plant, you've got these dry pods, which these beans are all over the garden. They're going to be growing everywhere next year, just from pods popping and them going everywhere. But if you let them dry, you then take these dry beans and you would want to soak them. This is like any dry beans you would purchase at the store. You want to soak them probably overnight, and then the next day you would do the same thing, like whatever seasoning you want, garlic, onions. You could put something like a ham hock or some bacon or something like that in it, and then cook these. And it will take just a little bit longer. If you soak them, it cuts down the cook time. Now, I like growing things as a second planting. They take probably like, I would say beans this way take probably like 50 days or so to get to the soft pod stage. And this goes for like cow peas, black eyed peas, anything like that, as well as any sort of beans you're gonna grow, like these butter beans, you know, pinto beans, black beans, calypso beans, just whatever the variety is. Probably around 50 days to the green shelling stage. If you want to let them dry on the plant, it's probably going to be more like 80 to 85 days. So you do need a long growing season to do this, especially as a second planting. I mean, you could grow them from the spring if you live in a short season area. But I like it because like I've got a lot of food out here that we sort of just grew in spaces we'd already used for our first harvest. And they're helping the soil. There's no real pressure to keep harvesting because typically by the time October rolls around, I'm pretty out of energy as far as really pushing hard and getting a lot done. I mean, once I've preserved all these tomatoes and peppers and all the other stuff that comes in throughout the season, I've spent a lot of time in the kitchen, and I don't really want another very demanding wave of preservation, but I don't want to waste the space. I'd still like to grow food. And so dry beans are great for the late season because like right now I'm going to come out, collect all the pods. I'm going to cut the plants off. It feeds the soil. I can compost the top of the plants or feed them to the animals. And then those pods, I can shell them whenever I feel like getting around to it. You can do it in the house and by the fireplace whenever it's cooled off. And then I have the dry beans, which I don't have to do anything to store them. You know, I mean, I just put them in a jar and put them in the pantry and cook them whenever I want to soak them. And then I grab a handful of them next year, and these are the seeds that I plant for next year's beans. Here's the size difference between the fresh beans and the dried beans. They do shrink up, but when I soak these, they'll get back to being big again. Actually, I can already tell you this bucket is way too small. It's almost time to come whip this space back into shape. It's not too messy in here, but I'll get some salad greens going in here for the winter. And then, I mean, I know this is like not, this is not it. This is not the way to be thinking. But it's currently mid-October, and that means November, December, January. It's only 3 months until seed starting for peppers. So a lot of the pods kind of dried up and curled. So when you grab them off, they sort of pop open and the beans go everywhere. Thankfully the holes in this basket are not large enough for them to fall through. hate picking stuff overhead. Because I end up with like bugs and leaves on me, and then I'll just be itching the rest of the day. All right, I got my basket full. I'm not gonna go fuller than that because I'm dropping them and they're popping open. The beans are flying, so I think probably need to just go get a 5-gallon bucket. I probably have that many more on plants, and I also need a step stool because a lot of them are up above my reach. When you're growing dry beans, you really have to grow quite a lot of space to get a whole lot of volume. Honestly, it's a little more labor intensive than makes a lot of sense. Those pots are still popping open. I don't know if you heard that. It's a little more labor intensive than makes a lot of sense in a small garden or a home garden, you know. I mean, even I have a lot of space, and I don't grow a ton of dry beans. Like, oh, I want to grow lots of food, so I want to grow dry beans. I just think there are better places for your energy and your space to really make sense. But that's why I like growing them like this, because then it's actually also helping establish more nutrition in the soil with the nitrogen fixing. And it's space that I've already used for something else. Like, obviously I wouldn't want to grow like a whole raised bed garden like this with dry beans everywhere, because once I get all of these shelled, I mean, I'm looking at maybe 5 or 6 pots of beans for my family, you know, like whole meals. If I put some sort of like meat in that, then we can do like a bean soup, or like a hearty pot of beans that has meat in it that you can eat with like cornbread or something like that. I do the shelling peas, like the cow peas, and we do those in the ground, but I mean, we grow a very large space of those, and it grows a good deal of food, but it is very labor intensive because you have to pick them all and then shell them all. So I don't know, it's nice because with the labor that goes into it, they're already done. Like, once they're shelled, there's no more labor beyond that. Preserving them is easy. They don't require refrigeration. So it's kind of like a balance, but it's not something that I'm trying to devote a ton of space to. I'll come back and do another picking later. It's getting close to lunchtime now. I was distracted there for a second looking up in the sky. It's actually an osprey. I saw that there was a bird of prey like circling, and I was making sure it wasn't a hawk coming over my chickens. We typically don't get a lot of hawks on our chickens because we put them out in the middle of this pasture with the electric fences around them, and the hawks don't like to swoop down without something to land on. We don't lose chickens to hawks here. We've lost them when they were under trees, but it was actually the osprey, and he was circling the pond. I love watching the osprey. Whenever it comes and fishes in the pond, it dives down underwater. It's so cool. He moved on. Sad. We won't go deep in here because the sprinkler's on, but check out the first bit of the pumpkin harvest. There's still a good deal of food to be had in here, and this is where I'm primarily going to focus, like harvesting and preserving until the frost comes. The high tunnel, if it's a very mild freeze, like a really light frost, I can lower the walls of the high tunnel and keep these peppers alive a little bit longer. It's like mild season extension, but if it's a hard freeze, it'll freeze in here. People ask me sometimes, like, oh, are you going to try to heat it? And no. I mean, you could try to shore it up. I've seen where people do like compost piles in their high tunnels to add heat. You can do low tunnels over your rows in your high tunnel, which helps protect from freeze. But we have such a long growing season, I just get as much of stuff as I can when it's growing, and then I move into things that grow well. So right now, that high tunnel is very planted with food that we'll be harvesting soon, past the freeze, all the roots and brassicas and leafy things. And then as the peppers die in here, you know, once it starts freezing hard, we'll rip this entirely out, and then I'll plant more roots and leaves, which this will be like the late winter, early spring harvests of cool weather crops. And I'm not planting anything outside. You can, where I live, technically, with a little bit of frost fabric, but with the 2 high tunnels, this is plenty of space for us to grow the food we need. Every time I pull forward and this moves, like more pods pop open. Makes them easy to shell. Yeah, look in here. It's looking pretty good. I mean, some things are a little on the smaller side, but they'll still steadily grow, and this will be food to eat. Oh look, y'all remember we sowed these radishes just a handful of weeks ago? We'll be harvesting those soon. They're starting to bulb. The cool weather has made these start to bulb too. These are my rutabagas. They're small now, but this makes me very excited. Actually, I was noticing like strawberries have put on a few blossoms again. The asparagus have a few shoots coming up. The roses started to bloom again. It's like the weather cools off and we have this one last burst of things blooming and growing, and then the freeze comes. You know, I used to be so sad at the end of the season. Like, I would sit in the garden past dark on the last day. I still actually do that, to be honest. The day that I know the freeze is coming, I usually do stay out in the garden until after it turns completely dark and I can't see anymore. But it's not so sad anymore. Now it's more peaceful for me than it used to be. I used to have a really hard time with the shifting the seasons, but I feel like the last few years, I don't know if this is just maturity or I don't know, maybe I'm just more tired than I used to be, but I feel like I embrace the season of rest a little better than I used to. I used to sit in the garden and then come inside and cry whenever I knew the freeze was gonna come and kill it. I do also have such a long season here. Like I said, I mean, we'll be starting pepper seeds in, like, you know, middle to end of January in the glass greenhouse, and then tomato seeds start middle of February, so that's not that long from now. It goes by fast. We will be focusing the next week or two in putting the garden to bed, finishing plugging in some things over here for the winter, and preserving peppers. And I don't know, I'm starting to think about crochet projects and handmade gifts and working on getting my house in order. I kind of got derailed from that. That was something I was really focusing on, and then the hurricane happened and we've sort of been catching up. But I'm gonna start painting again, and I don't know. How about you? Have you learned to embrace the seasons? I'm a work in progress, but we'll get there. Thank you guys for hanging out with me today. I bless you. Until next time.